The rain hammered against the bulletproof windows of the penthouse like 1,000 angry fists, each drop an accusation, each gust of wind a warning. Vincent Moretti stood in the darkness of his daughter's bedroom, watching the tiny chest rise and fall beneath silk sheets worth more than most people earned in a month. 3 years old. Maya had been on this earth for only 3 years, and already she was dying. The doctors had given him the prognosis 6 months ago, their voices clinical and detached as they destroyed his world with medical terminology he barely understood. Acute lymphoblastic leukemia. Aggressive. Rare. The kind that didn't care if your father owned half the city's underground, that didn't negotiate, didn't accept bribes, didn't fear retribution. For the first time in 20 years, Vincent Moretti had encountered something his power couldn't touch. He reached out with hands that had ordered deaths without trembling and gently brushed a curl from Maya's forehead. Her skin felt like paper, thin and fragile, burning with the low-grade fever that never quite left anymore. She stirred, whimpering softly, and his heart cracked a little more. He had built an empire on fear and blood, had clawed his way up from the gutters of Brooklyn to command respect from men who respected nothing. And now he stood helpless before the smallest, most precious thing he had ever created. "Daddy?" Her voice was barely a whisper, her eyes fluttering open in the dim light of the Mickey Mouse nightlight he had installed himself. "I'm here, Piccola." He knelt beside her bed, making himself small, making himself safe. "Just checking on you." "Story?" She reached for him with fingers too thin, and he gathered her into his arms carefully, terrified of breaking what was already broken. "Not tonight, baby. You need to sleep. Get strong." But even as he said it, he knew. The treatments weren't working. The best doctors money could buy in New York, in Boston, in Europe, none of them could do what needed to be done. What Maya needed wasn't available through conventional channels. What Maya needed was a miracle wrapped in experimental medicine, the kind that existed in whispered conversations between research oncologists, the kind that required connections even deeper than his ran. He had made the call 3 days ago, the kind of call that ended careers, that toppled carefully constructed lives, that changed everything. He had called Senator Richard Hawthorne, a man who owed him more favors than he could count, a man whose political career Vincent had funded and protected through 5 elections. And Vincent had asked for something that would cost them both everything. "I need access to the Stanford trial," he had said, his voice steady despite the desperation clawing at his throat. "The one they're not talking about. The one with the modified CAR T cells." The silence on the other end had lasted an eternity. Then Hawthorne had sighed, a sound like a man watching his life collapse. "Vincent, what you're asking, if this gets out, if anyone traces it, my daughter is dying." 4 words. That was all it took. 4 words that contained universes of pain, oceans of desperation, the complete dismantling of the carefully controlled persona Vincent had spent decades constructing. He heard Hawthorne's breathing change, heard the moment the senator stopped seeing him as the dangerous criminal who held his secrets, and started seeing him as simply a father watching his child slip away. "I'll make it happen," Hawthorne had whispered. "But Vincent, you need to understand. This trial, it's not approved. If she participates, if anything goes wrong, there's no legal protection. And the exposure, they'll come for both of us. The FBI has been building a case against you for years. This could be the thread they pull." Vincent had looked at Maya sleeping in her hospital bed, tubes and wires connecting her to machines that beeped and hummed their mechanical lullabies, and he had made his choice. Let them come. Now, 3 days later, he held his daughter in the darkness and waited for the call that would tell him whether his gamble had paid off, whether Richard Hawthorne had managed to pull strings that reached into the highest echelons of medical research and federal oversight, whether... His phone vibrated in his pocket. Maya had already drifted back to sleep against his shoulder, her breathing shallow but steady. He laid her down gently, tucking her stuffed elephant under her arm, and stepped into the hallway before answering. "It's done." Hawthorne's voice was hollow, defeated. "She's in. First treatment is scheduled for Monday at Stanford Medical. But Vincent, you need to know. The FBI knows. Someone talked. They're moving up their timeline. They're coming for you next week. Maybe sooner." Vincent closed his eyes. The walls were closing in, just as he had known they would. 20 years of careful planning, of maintaining plausible deniability, of keeping his hands technically clean while running operations that generated hundreds of millions in revenue. All of it about to collapse because he had reached too far, asked for too much, exposed himself for the one thing that mattered more than survival. How long do I have? 72 hours, maybe? I'm sorry, Vincent, I really am. He ended the call and stood in the hallway of his penthouse, this palace he had built on the backs of broken men and broken laws, and he felt the weight of every choice he had ever made settling onto his shoulders. The treatment in Stanford would take months. Maya would need constant care, monitoring, support through the grueling process of having her immune system rebuilt cell by cell. And he would be in federal prison, watching it all from behind bars if he was lucky, or dead if his enemies decided to move first. He couldn't be both places. He couldn't protect her from inside a cell. He couldn't hold her hand through the treatments from a courtroom, couldn't comfort her through the pain and fear and confusion of what was coming. For the first time in his life, Vincent Moretti couldn't see a path forward that didn't require sacrifice. The penthouse was silent except for the rain and the distant hum of the city 20 floors below. His staff had gone home hours ago. The security team was minimal tonight, just Marcus at the front entrance and 2 men in the lobby. He had wanted privacy for this moment, this reckoning with everything he had built and everything he was about to lose. He walked to his study and poured 3 fingers of scotch, the expensive kind that tasted like smoke and regret. His father had died in prison when Vincent was 17, shivved in a shower by a rival family's soldier, bleeding out on dirty tile while guards took their time responding. His mother had followed 6 months later, her heart simply giving up under the weight of grief and shame. And Vincent had sworn he would never be weak enough to love anything more than power, never leave himself vulnerable to that kind of pain. Then Maria had walked into his life. Maria with her laugh like summer rain, with her complete refusal to be impressed by his money or afraid of his reputation. She had worked at a gallery in Soho, had looked at him like he was just a man instead of a monster, and somehow that had been enough to crack the armor he had spent years forging. They had 2 perfect years together, 2 years of pretending he could be normal, could be good, could build something clean on a foundation of blood. Maya had been born on a Tuesday morning in May, and Vincent had held her in the hospital and felt his entire existence realign around this tiny, perfect creature who knew nothing of the world he inhabited, who saw him only as safety and warmth and love. Maria had smiled at him from her hospital bed, exhausted and radiant, and whispered, "She's going to change everything, isn't she?" "Yes," he had said, and he had meant it. 8 months later, Maria had been killed by a car bomb meant for him. A message from the Calabrese family. A retaliation for territory disputes Vincent barely remembered now. The explosion had taken her and 2 bodyguards, had destroyed a street corner in Queens, and had left Maya motherless at 9 months old. After that, Vincent had waged a war so brutal, so comprehensive, that the Calabrese family had ceased to exist within 6 weeks. He had salted the earth of their operations, had made examples of their soldiers that served as warnings for a generation. But Maria was still gone. And Maya had grown up in a fortress, protected by men with guns, isolated from the world by the very violence meant to keep her safe. Now she was dying, and Vincent faced a choice that felt like being torn in half. Run with her, disappear into some carefully constructed new identity, and hope the treatment worked while living in constant fear of being found, or surrender. Give her the best chance at survival by ensuring she received the care she needed under protection he could arrange through his organization, and accept that he would watch her grow up through prison visiting rooms and monitored phone calls. There was a third option, whispered in the back of his mind, the kind of plan that required sacrificing everything he had built for one chance at a future he might never see. It would require trust he wasn't sure he possessed anymore, faith in humanity he had beaten out of himself years ago. It would require finding someone who could love Maya the way she deserved, protect her the way he couldn't, be there in all the ways his choices had made impossible. A sound from the hallway pulled him from his thoughts. Soft footsteps, hesitant, approaching his study. He set down the scotch and turned as the door opened slowly. Clara Washington stood in the doorway, her dark eyes meeting his with a mixture of concern and courage that had become familiar over the past 2 years. She was Maya's nanny, the woman he had hired to care for his daughter after cycling through 6 others who couldn't handle the isolation, the security protocols, the strange reality of working in a home that was both a palace and a prison. Clara was different. Clara had looked at the bulletproof windows and the armed guards and the complicated man who employed her, and she had stayed because Maya needed her. "Mr. Moretti," she said softly, her voice carrying the gentle strength he had come to rely on more than he wanted to admit. "I heard you on the phone. I wasn't trying to listen, but the walls—" "It's fine." He gestured for her to come in, noting the way she moved with careful grace, never quite letting her guard down despite 2 years in his employ. She wore simple clothes, jeans and a sweater, but carried herself with a dignity that had nothing to do with money or status. She was 28, had grown up in the Bronx, had worked her way through nursing school before discovering she preferred caring for children over working hospital rotations. Her references had been impeccable. Her background check had revealed nothing more dangerous than parking tickets and a fierce loyalty to her younger siblings. "How much did you hear?" he asked. Clara stood in the doorway, neither entering fully nor retreating. "Enough to know that Maya is going to Stanford for treatment. Enough to know you're in trouble." She paused, her fingers gripping the doorframe. "Enough to know you're trying to figure out how to be in 2 places at once." He studied her in the dim light of his study, this woman who had become essential to his daughter's life in ways he hadn't fully appreciated until this moment. Clara read to Maya for hours, her voice animated and warm, bringing stories to life in ways that made his daughter forget the pain. She sat beside her during chemotherapy sessions, holding her hand and singing softly when the nausea became too much. She had learned to navigate the complicated world of Maya's medical needs with the efficiency of a trained nurse and the tenderness of a mother. And she had never asked questions about his business, never commented on the men who came and went from his penthouse at odd hours, never flinched when she overheard conversations that would terrify most people. She simply loved Maya with a fierceness that Vincent recognized because he felt it himself. "She trusts you," he said finally. "Maya, she trusts you more than anyone except me." Claire's expression softened. "She's an incredible little girl. Even with everything she's going through, she still smiles, still wants to hear stories about princesses and dragons, still believes the world is good." "The world isn't good." "No," Clara agreed quietly. "But she doesn't need to know that yet. She needs to believe in happy endings long enough to fight for hers." Vincent turned back to his scotch, the amber liquid catching the light. "The FBI is coming for me, within days. And Maya needs months of treatment in California, constant care, someone who knows her medical history, someone she feels safe with." He took a breath that felt like swallowing glass. "I can't be that person anymore. Not where I'm going." The silence stretched between them, heavy with implications. He could hear Clara's breathing, steady and calm despite what he was suggesting. When she spoke, her voice was clear. "You want me to take her?" Not a question. A statement of understanding so complete it made his chest tighten. He turned to face her, this woman who had somehow become the most important person in his life outside of Maya herself. "I want to give you everything I have," he said, and his voice cracked on the words. "My accounts, my properties, my connections, everything that isn't tied directly to a legal activity. It's enough to keep Maya in treatment for years, to give her a life, to make sure she never wants for anything. I have lawyers who can make it legal, who can structure it so that you become her legal guardian, so that when I go to prison, she doesn't end up in the system." Clara's eyes glistened. "You're asking me to become her mother." "I'm asking you to save her life. I'm asking you to do what I can't do anymore. Be there. Be present. Be free." He moved closer, his hands steady despite the earthquake happening in his chest. "I've watched you with her for 2 years, Clara. I know how you look at her. I know you love her." "Of course I love her," Clara whispered, and a tear traced down her cheek. "But Mr. Moretti, what you're describing, taking everything you've built, raising your daughter, becoming responsible for her life, that's not just about love. That's about trust. And you're a man who doesn't trust anyone." She was right. Vincent had built his empire on the principle that trust was weakness, that everyone had a price, that loyalty only lasted as long as fear or profit maintained it. He had tested everyone who worked for him, had contingencies and backup plans and insurance policies against betrayal. But standing here in his study with the rain hammering outside and 72 hours until his world collapsed, he realized he had already made his choice months ago. "When Maya was in the hospital last month," he said slowly, "after that bad reaction to the medication, I watched you sit with her for 18 hours straight. You didn't leave even when I told you to rest. You held her hand and sang to her and promised her she was going to be okay, even though you had no way of knowing that was true." Clara's breath hitched. "She needed someone. She needed you. And I realized something watching you that night." He met her eyes, letting her see past the armor for perhaps the first time since Maria had died. "I realized that the only person I trust to love my daughter the way she deserves is you." The words hung in the air between them, a confession and a plea and a transfer of power all at once. Clara wiped at her eyes, her composure cracking, and Vincent saw her the way Maya must see her, not as an employee or a stranger, but as safety itself. "If I do this," Clara said, her voice shaking, If I take her to California and become her guardian, I need to know you understand what you're asking. You're asking me to walk away from my life here, my family, my friends, everything familiar. You're asking me to build a new existence around a child who might not survive, who will definitely suffer, who will need everything I have to give and more. I know. And you're asking me to do it knowing that you won't be there, that I'll be alone in every decision, every crisis, every 3 a.m. hospital visit, that I'll have to be enough when she asks why her daddy isn't there. Vincent's throat constricted. He hadn't let himself think about that part, about Maya crying for him while he rotted in a federal prison, about the birthdays he would miss and the milestones he would only hear about through letters and monitored calls. But Clara was right to make him face it. Right to demand he understand the full weight of what he was placing on her shoulders. "I'm asking too much," he said hoarsely. "I know I'm asking too much. But Clara, she's dying, and this treatment is her only chance, and I can't—" His voice broke completely, and for the first time in 20 years, Vincent Moretti let someone see him cry. "I can't save her, but maybe you can." Clara crossed the distance between them and did something no one had dared do in decades. She reached out and took his hand, her fingers warm and solid against his. "I'll do it," she said quietly. "Not because of money or because you're asking. I'll do it because Maya is the sweetest, bravest little girl I've ever known, and she deserves someone who will fight for her the way you've been fighting. She deserves someone who will be there when you can't be." Relief crashed through him so powerfully, he had to steady himself against the desk. "Thank you. God, Clara, thank you." "But we do this my way," she continued, her voice gaining strength. "No half measures, no keeping connections to your old life that could put her in danger. If I'm going to be her guardian, then we cut ties completely. New names, new city, fresh start. Your lawyers can handle the transfer of assets, but after that, Vincent Moretti doesn't exist in our lives. Do you understand?" He understood. She was protecting Maya from the fallout of his choices, from the enemies who would see his daughter as leverage or revenge, from the darkness that had consumed his entire adult life. She was drawing a line between the man he was and the life his daughter deserved, and she was right to demand it. "I understand." Clara nodded, all business now despite the tears still wet on her cheeks. "Then we need to move fast. If the FBI is coming, we have to get Maya to Stanford before they freeze your assets or put you in custody. How quickly can your lawyers make the guardianship legal?" 48 hours. I have judges who owe me favors, people who can expedite paperwork. He was already thinking through the logistics, the careful choreography required to transfer everything that mattered while the walls closed in. But Clara, once this starts, there's no going back. If you change your mind, I won't. Her certainty was absolute, unshakable. That little girl in there saved my life once, even though she doesn't know it. I was drowning before I came here, lost and broken and convinced I didn't matter. And then I met Maya, and she looked at me like I hung the moon, like my presence made her world better. Nobody had ever looked at me like that before. Vincent saw something in her expression then, a flash of pain she usually kept hidden. He realized how little he actually knew about Clara Washington beyond her resume and background check, how carefully she had guarded her own story while caring for his daughter. "What happened to you?" he asked gently. She met his gaze steadily. "I lost my daughter 3 years ago before I came to work for you. She was 6 months old. SIDS, sudden infant death syndrome. One morning I went to get her from her crib and she was just gone. No warning, no chance to say goodbye, just Gone. Her voice remained calm, but Vincent saw the abyss of grief beneath the words. I couldn't work in pediatrics after that. Couldn't handle seeing other people's babies when mine was dead. So I became a nanny instead, thinking maybe I could help someone else's child since I couldn't save my own. Understanding crashed through Vincent like a wave. That was why she loved Maya so fiercely, why she fought for her with such desperate determination. She was trying to save the daughter she couldn't save before, trying to rewrite an ending that had destroyed her. And Vincent was giving her the chance to do it. "I'm sorry," he said, the words utterly inadequate. "I didn't know." "How could you? I don't talk about it. Don't like the pity in people's eyes." She straightened her shoulders, pushing the grief back down where she usually kept it locked. "But I want you to understand why I'm saying yes. It's not just about the money or even about Maya, though I love her with everything I have. It's about getting a second chance to be the mother I was supposed to be, to fight for a child the way I couldn't fight for my own." Vincent understood second chances. His entire criminal empire had been built on the ashes of his father's failures, his whole life an attempt to rewrite a story that had ended in blood and shame. And now, he was handing his most precious possession to a woman who needed redemption as badly as he did, trusting that her broken heart was exactly what would keep his daughter safe. "She's lucky to have you," he said. "No," Clara shook her head. "I'm lucky to have her, and I promise you, Vincent, I will protect her with my life. I will get her through this treatment. I will make sure she knows she is loved, that she is wanted, that her daddy gave up everything to save her." Her voice intensified. "And when she's old enough to understand, I'll tell her the truth. That you were a complicated man who made terrible choices, but that you loved her more than your own freedom, more than your own life." The rain had stopped sometime during their conversation, leaving only the drip of water from the eaves and the distant sound of the city breathing below. Vincent looked at this woman who had become his daughter's salvation, and he made the hardest decision of his life. "We have 72 hours, he said. "Let's make sure Maya has everything she needs." The next 48 hours passed in a blur of controlled chaos. Vincent's lawyers worked around the clock, drawing up guardianship papers and trusts and transfer documents that would stand up to federal scrutiny while protecting Clara and Maya from his criminal associations. He met with his most trusted lieutenants and dissolved his empire piece by piece, distributing territory to rivals in carefully negotiated deals, ensuring no power vacuum that would lead to war in the streets. He called in every favor he had accumulated over 20 years, pulling strings to get Clara a new identity, to ensure the Stanford medical team would accept Maya as a patient under her new guardian's name, to create a paper trail so clean it would satisfy even the FBI's forensic accountants. He liquidated assets and transferred wealth through channels so complex that tracing it back would take years, buying Maya time and safety with money that had bought him power and fear. And through it all, he spent every possible moment with his daughter. They had tea parties in her bedroom, with Clara joining them and pretending to be various stuffed animals while Maya giggled. They watched Maya's favorite movies curled together on the couch, Vincent memorizing the sound of her laugh and the weight of her body against his. They read stories, with Vincent doing all the voices the way she loved, making dragons growl and princesses sound brave. On their last night together, Vincent carried Maya to the window and pointed at the city lights spread out below. "Do you see all those lights, Piccola?" "So many," Maya breathed, her eyes wide with wonder despite the exhaustion that never quite left her anymore. "Each one is someone's home, someone's family, and somewhere out there is a place where you're going to get better, where the doctors have special medicine that's going to make you strong again. Will you come with me? The question hit him like a bullet. He held her tighter, his chin resting on her curls. I can't, baby. Daddy has things he needs to take care of here, but Clara is going to go with you, and she's going to take such good care of you, even better than I could. Maya twisted in his arms to look at him with those enormous eyes that saw too much. But I want you. I know, and I want to be there more than anything in the world. But sometimes daddies have to make hard choices to keep their little girls safe. He kissed her forehead, breathing in the scent of her shampoo and trying to memorize everything about this moment. Clara loves you so much, Maya, and she's going to be right there with you through everything. You're going to stay in a new city for a while, and you're going to meet new doctors, and you're going to be so brave. Brave like a princess? Braver, like a warrior. He smiled through the tears he refused to let fall in front of her. And every night before you go to sleep, I want you to remember that Daddy loves you more than all the stars in the sky, more than all the lights in this city, more than anything that ever existed or ever will exist. Can you remember that? I remember, she said solemnly. Then she yawned, the medication making her drowsy. Will you sing? So Vincent Moretti, who had ordered executions and run criminal enterprises and done things that would haunt him forever, sang a lullaby to his dying daughter. He sang in Italian, the language his grandmother had taught him, the language of his childhood before everything went dark. He sang about stars and angels and love that transcended distance, and Maya fell asleep in his arms one last time. Clara stood in the doorway watching, her eyes red but her expression steady. When Maya's breathing deepened into sleep, Vincent carried her to bed and tucked her in with such careful tenderness it made his hands shake. He kissed her forehead and whispered a prayer he wasn't sure anyone was listening to. Then he turned to Clara and handed her everything. The papers, the account numbers, the new identities, the contact information for the Stanford oncology team. The keys to a life he would never see. There's a car waiting downstairs, he said quietly. Private plane leaves in 2 hours. By the time the FBI gets here tomorrow morning, you'll be in California, and the guardianship will be ironclad. What about you? I'll be here. I'll make sure they find what they're looking for so they don't look for what they're not supposed to find. He managed a weak smile. I'm good at misdirection. It's kept me alive this long. Clara stepped forward and hugged him, something she had never done before. She will know you loved her, she whispered fiercely. I promise you that. Every day of her life, she will know. Take care of her. With everything I am. They stood together in the quiet of the penthouse, two people bound by love for the same child, by the impossible choices that had brought them to this moment. Then Clara went to pack the last of Maya's things, and Vincent stood in his daughter's doorway, watching her sleep and memorizing the sight for all the years ahead when memory would be all he had. The car came at midnight. Vincent carried Maya down to it himself, her head resting on his shoulder, still deep in medication-induced sleep. Clara followed with bags, her expression composed despite the enormity of what they were doing. At the car, Vincent held his daughter one last time, breathing her in, feeling her heartbeat against his chest. I love you, Piccola, he whispered into her hair. More than you will ever know. He handed her to Clara, who settled into the back seat with Maya cradled in her arms. The driver closed the door, sealing them into the vehicle, and Vincent stepped back as the car pulled away from the curb. He watched the taillights disappear into the New York night, taking his daughter and his heart with them. Then Vincent Moretti walked back into his penthouse and waited for dawn. The FBI came at 6 a.m., just as Hawthorne had predicted. 20 agents with a warrant and enough evidence to put him away for life. They found Vincent sitting in his study, drinking coffee, dressed in an expensive suit, his affairs completely in order. When they arrested him, he didn't resist. When they read him his rights, he didn't speak. When they asked where his daughter was, he smiled and said nothing. Let them search. Let them dig. They would find nothing that led to Maya or Clara. His lawyers had been too good, his planning too thorough. His daughter was safe. She was with someone who loved her. She had a chance. That was all that mattered. The trial took 6 months. Federal prosecutors threw everything they had at him: racketeering, money laundering, conspiracy charges that stretched back 15 years. His former associates testified against him, offered deals too good to refuse. The evidence was overwhelming, undeniable. Vincent Moretti was going to prison for the rest of his life. He accepted it with quiet dignity. But in that courtroom, in those months of testimony and legal maneuvering, something strange happened. Letters started arriving at the prison where he was held pending trial. Letters from California, from a Clara Washington who wrote about a little girl undergoing treatment at Stanford. Letters that described Maya's bravery during procedures, her determination to get better, her slowly, carefully strengthening body as the experimental treatment began to work. Clara sent photos. Maya with her hair falling out from chemotherapy, smiling despite everything. Maya hooked to IV lines, reading a book. Maya with other children in the treatment ward, sharing her stuffed elephant with a boy who was crying. Each image was a knife to Vincent's heart and a balm to his soul all at once. And Clara sent updates on Maya's questions. She asks about you every day, one letter read. I tell her you're doing something very important, that you're making sure she stays safe. She draws you pictures. She wants to mail them to you, but I explained that where you are, mail is complicated. She said to tell you she loves you to the moon and back. That's her new favorite phrase. Vincent kept every letter, every photo, every crayon drawing in a box under his bunk. On the worst nights, when the walls of his cell felt like they were closing in, when he faced the reality of spending the next 30 years behind bars, he would read Clara's words and look at his daughter's smile and remember why he had made this choice. 7 months into his incarceration, during a routine visit from his lawyer, Vincent received news that made him weep for the first time since his arrest. Maya's cancer was in remission. The experimental treatment had worked. She was getting stronger every day, her oncologist cautiously optimistic about her long-term prognosis. Clara wants you to know, his lawyer said gently, that Maya is thriving. She's enrolled in preschool, making friends. She still asks about you, but she's happy. Really, genuinely happy. Vincent put his head in his hands and let himself break. All the fear, all the desperate hope, all the aching absence of the past months, it poured out of him in great, shaking sobs that echoed off the concrete walls. His daughter was alive. She was getting better. Everything he had sacrificed had been worth it. There's more, his lawyer continued quietly. Clara has requested permission to bring Maya for a visit. She thinks Maya is old enough now to understand, and she wants to make sure you know your daughter hasn't forgotten you. The visit was scheduled for 2 weeks later. Vincent spent those 14 days in an agony of anticipation and terror. What would Maya think when she saw him in a prison jumpsuit? Would she be frightened by the guards? By the institutional bleakness of the visiting room? Would she even recognize him after all these months? When the day came, Vincent sat at the metal table in the visiting room with his hands shaking. Other inmates sat with their families, the room filled with the sound of strained conversations and children crying. Then the door opened, and Clara walked in holding Maya's hand. She was taller. That was the first thing Vincent noticed. 7 months had added inches to her height, had taken away some of the baby roundness from her face. Her hair was growing back, curling around her ears in soft waves. She wore pink overalls and light-up sneakers and carried a teddy bear Vincent didn't recognize. And she was smiling. "Daddy!" Maya pulled away from Clara and ran to him, and Vincent scooped her up despite the guard's warning gesture, holding her against his chest and breathing in the scent of her shampoo and the miracle of her solid, living weight in his arms. "Hi, baby," he managed, his voice thick with tears he couldn't control. "Look at you. You're so big." "I'm 4 now." She pulled back to look at him with those enormous eyes, her expression serious. "Did you know that? I had a birthday. Clara made me a princess cake." "I know. Clara sent me pictures. Did you make a wish?" Maya nodded solemnly. "I wished for you to come home. But Clara says wishes take time sometimes." She touched his face with small fingers. "Why are you sad, Daddy?" "I'm not sad, Piccola. I'm happy. So happy to see you." He looked at Clara over Maya's head, and she smiled at him with such gentle understanding it made his chest hurt. "Are you being good for Clara?" "Uh-huh. I help with cooking, and I clean my room mostly, and I'm learning to read." She wiggled with excitement. "Want to see?" For the next hour, Vincent sat with his daughter in a prison visiting room and listened to her read simple words from a picture book Clara had brought. He admired drawings she had made, heard about her friends at preschool, learned about her favorite cartoon characters and the songs she liked to sing. He watched her interact with Clara with such easy affection, such clear trust and love, and he understood that Clara had done what he had asked. She had become Maya's mother in every way that mattered. When the guard announced visiting hours were ending, Maya's face crumpled. "But I don't want to go." "I know, baby, but you have to. Clara needs to get you home, and Daddy needs to stay here a while longer." He hugged her tightly, memorizing the feeling. "But I'll see you again soon, and every night you remember." "You love me more than all the stars," Maya finished. "I remember, Daddy. I remember every night." Clara gathered Maya gently, giving Vincent a moment to compose himself. "We'll come back," she promised quietly, "as often as they'll let us. And I'll keep writing, keep sending pictures. She needs you in her life, Vincent. Even like this, she needs to know you're there." "Thank you," he whispered, "for everything. For saving her, for loving her, for being everything I couldn't be." "You saved her too," Clara said firmly. "Don't ever forget that. Everything you gave up, everything you sacrificed, that's what gave her this life. That's what gave her a chance." They left, and Vincent watched them go. Clara's hand wrapped around Maya's, his daughter skipping despite the institutional grimness of the prison, still smiling, still alive, still loved. He returned to his cell and added Maya's latest drawings to his collection, and he let himself believe that maybe, despite everything, he had done one thing right. The years passed slowly behind bars. Vincent kept his head down, avoided trouble, and lived for Clara's letters and the quarterly visits where he got to watch his daughter grow. Maya turned 5, then 6, then 7. Her cancer stayed in remission. She thrived in school, made friends, developed passions for art and science, and told anyone who would listen about the amazing woman who was raising her. Clara sent photos of every milestone: Maya's first day of school, her science fair projects, her 8th birthday party with a dozen laughing children. In every image, Maya glowed with health and happiness, her eyes bright with the uncomplicated joy of a child who had been given a second chance at life. Vincent's fellow inmates learned not to bother him on visiting days. He would return to his cell transformed, lighter somehow, sustained by a few hours in his daughter's presence. The other men respected it, this fierce paternal love that had cost him everything and asked for nothing in return except the knowledge that his child was alive. On Maya's 10th birthday, Clara's letter contained unexpected news. "She's asking harder questions now," Clara wrote in her careful script. "She wants to know why you're in prison, what you did, whether you're a bad person. I've told her age-appropriate truths, that you made mistakes trying to protect the people you loved, that sometimes good people make bad choices. But Vincent, she's getting old enough to understand more, old enough to hear the real story if you're ready to tell it." Vincent stared at the letter for hours that night, watching shadows crawl across his cell walls. Maya was 10. No longer the sick toddler he'd held in his penthouse, no longer the small child who accepted simple explanations. She was becoming a person with her own moral compass, her own capacity for judgment. And she deserved the truth. He wrote back to Clara, "Tell her I'll explain everything at our next visit. No more hiding. She's old enough now." When they came the following month, Vincent could see the questions in Maya's eyes before she even sat down. She was taller now, all gangly limbs and serious expression, her hair long and healthy, pulled back in a ponytail. She looked so much like Maria it made his breath catch. "Daddy?" she said, her voice steady despite the nervousness in her fingers as they twisted the hem of her shirt. "Clara says you want to talk to me about grown-up stuff." Vincent glanced at Clara, who nodded encouragement, then turned his full attention to his daughter. "I do, Piccola. You're old enough now to hear the truth about who I was, about the choices I made." For the next hour, he told her everything. He didn't hide behind euphemisms or justifications. He told her about his criminal empire, about the violence and corruption that had built his wealth. He told her about the people he'd hurt, the laws he'd broken, the darkness he'd embraced. He watched her face as he spoke, saw confusion give way to shock, saw her struggling to reconcile the father she loved with the man he was describing. "But why?" she asked finally, her voice small. "Why did you do those things?" "Because I thought power meant safety," he said quietly. "Because I grew up watching my father die in a place like this, and I swore I'd never be weak. I was wrong, Maya, about so much. I built an empire on fear and called it strength. I hurt people and called it survival." He leaned forward as far as the table would allow. "But then I had you, and for the first time in my life, I understood what actually mattered. When you got sick, I would have given anything, done anything, to save you. And in the end, that's exactly what I did." Tears tracked down Maya's cheeks. "You gave up everything for me." "I gave up things that never really mattered to save the only thing that did." He smiled despite the ache in his chest. "You want to know if I'm a bad person? I did bad things, Maya. Terrible things I can never take back. But loving you, protecting you, giving you the chance to live, that's the one purely good thing I've ever done. And I'd make the same choice again, every single time." Maya was quiet for a long moment, processing. Then she looked at Clara, who had tears in her own eyes, and back at her father. Clara says that people are complicated, that we're all mixtures of good and bad, and what matters is trying to do better. Clara is very wise. She also says you gave me the best gift anyone ever could. You gave me a chance to live, and you gave me her. Maya reached across the table and took his hand, her fingers small but strong. I still love you, Daddy, even knowing all of this. Is that okay? Vincent couldn't speak past the emotion choking him. He squeezed her hand and nodded, unable to form words that could express the gratitude and relief and overwhelming love flooding through him. Clara spoke gently. Love doesn't mean approving of everything someone has done. It means seeing all of them, the good and the bad, and choosing to care anyway. They sat together in that visiting room, this unusual family bound by sacrifice and love, and Vincent understood that this was his redemption. Not freedom, not forgiveness for his crimes, but this, his daughter alive and thriving, looking at him with clear eyes that saw his truth and loved him anyway. As visiting hours ended and Clara gathered Maya to leave, his daughter hugged him fiercely. I'm going to keep visiting, she whispered, every time they let me, because you're my daddy, and that matters more than anything else. Vincent watched them walk away, Clara's arm around Maya's shoulders, his daughter turning back to wave one last time before the door closed. He returned to his cell, carrying the weight of his sins and the lightness of grace he'd never earned, but had been given anyway. That night, he added Maya's latest school photo to his collection. 10 years old, healthy and smiling, alive against all odds. He had decades left in prison, years stretching ahead in this cage he'd earned. But his daughter was out there, living the life he'd bought with everything he had. It was enough. More than enough. It was everything.